Taborites. The burning of Jan Hus in 1415 gave the impetus to the anti-Catholic Hussite movement in Bohemia. The more radical faction of the Hussites was concentrated in a well-protected town near Prague. They called the place Tabor. Preachers from heretical sects gravitated there from all over Europe: Joachimites, followers of Joachim of Flor, Waldensians, Beghards. Chiliastic and socialist theories were prevalent among the Taborites, and there were numerous attempts to bring theory into practice. We shall give a brief outline of the views of the Taborites based on the writings of their contemporaries, the future Pope Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, Pierzabrum, Wawrinuk, Lawrence of Brezin. The end of the world, the Consummatio Saeculi, was to occur in 1420. The term, however, covers only the end of the old world and of the dominion of evil. All the wicked would be removed forthwith. The day of vengeance and the year of retribution were drawing near. Quote, "The lofty and powerful must be bent down like tree branches and cut off and burned in furnaces like straw, leaving neither root nor branch. They must be thrashed like sheaves of grain, their blood drained to the last drop. They are to be exterminated with scorpions, serpents, and wild beasts, and put to death everywhere." End quote. Christ's law of mercy was to be abolished, since, quote, "its interpretation and written tenets contradict in much the opinion cited above." End quote. On the contrary, one was to act, quote, "resolutely and with zeal and with just retribution." End quote. Furthermore, quote, "it is necessary for each of the faithful to wash his hands in the blood of the enemies of Christ." End quote. Moreover, quote, "anyone who protests against the shedding of the blood of Christ's enemies shall be cursed and punished just as these enemies are. All peasants who refuse to join the Taborites shall be destroyed together with their property." End quote. God's kingdom on earth will be established, but not for all, only for the elect. Evil will not be eliminated from the world but will be subjected to the control of those who are good. All the faithful were to congregate in 5 cities. Those who remained outside would not be spared the last judgment. From these cities the faithful were to rule the world, and those cities and towns opposing them were to be destroyed and burnt like Sodom. In particular, quote, "in this year of retribution, Prague must be destroyed and burnt by the faithful like Babylon." End quote. The period was to culminate in the coming of Christ. Then the chosen of God would, quote, "reign with the Lord visibly and physically for 1,000 years." End quote. When Christ had descended to earth with his angels, pious souls who had died for Christ were to be resurrected in order to judge the sinners with him. Wives would conceive without knowing a man and give birth without pain. No one would sow or reap. Quote, "the fruit of the earth shall no longer be consumed." End quote. The call went out from the preachers, quote, "to do no work, to pull down trees and destroy houses, churches, and monasteries." End quote. Quote, "all human institutions and human laws must be abolished, for none of them were created by the Heavenly Father." End quote. It was taught that the Church was, quote, "heretical and unrighteous, and that all its wealth must be taken away and given to laymen." End quote. And, quote, "the houses of priests and all church property must be demolished, and the churches, altars, and monasteries destroyed." End quote. Quote, "church bells were taken down and broken to pieces and then sold away to foreign lands. Church objects, candlesticks, gold, and silver were smashed." End quote. Everywhere altars were smashed, the sacraments cast out, God's temples defiled and turned into stalls and stables. Quote, "the sacrament was trodden underfoot. The blood of Christ was poured out, chalices stolen and sold." End quote. One of the Taborite preachers stated that he, quote, "would sooner pray to the devil than bend his knee before the Holy Eucharist." End quote. A great multitude of priests were killed, burned, and slaughtered, and the greatest joy for them was to seize somebody and murder him. The favorite song of the Taborites was, "Come on, monks, let's see you dance for us." It was said that when the kingdom of the righteous came there would be, quote, no need for anyone to teach another. There would be no need for books or scriptures, and all worldly wisdom will perish and, quote, in monasteries the Taborites invariably destroyed the libraries. Quote, all belongings must be taken away from God's enemies and burned or otherwise destroyed. End quote. Quote, this winter and summer the preachers and elder headmen have been persistently duping the peasants to pour money into their barrels. End quote. In this manner all money in the community was socialized. Supervisors of the barrels were appointed to oversee the strict delivery of money and to distribute the communal fund. Quote, in the town of Tabor there is nothing which is mine or thine, but all possess everything in common and no one is to have anything apart, and whoever does is a sinner. End quote. One point of the Taborite program stated, no one shall possess anything, but everything must be communal. The preachers taught, everything will be common, including wives, there will be free sons and daughters of God and there will be no marriage as union of two husband and wife. Among the Taborites, a beghard from Belgium founded a sect of Adamites who established themselves on a small island in the Luznice River. He pronounced himself Adam and the Son of God, called upon to resurrect the dead and to carry out what was foreordained in the Apocalypse. The Adamites considered themselves to be the incarnation of the omnipresent God. They expected the world soon to be flooded with blood as high as a horse's bridle. On this earth they saw themselves as God's scythe sent to take vengeance and to destroy all that is vile in the world. Forgiveness was a sin. They killed and they burned towns and villages at night, citing the phrase from the Bible, at midnight there was a cry made. In the town of Persik they killed people, young and old, and burned the town. Their gatherings they wore no clothing, believing that only in this way would they become pure. They had no marriage. Every man could choose women at will. It was enough to say about a woman, she inflames my spirit, for Adam to give his blessing, go and give fruit and multiply and populate the earth. According to certain sources, their sexual relations were completely indiscriminate. The sky they call a roof and say there is no God on earth as there are no devils in hell. On orders from Jan Žižka, Adamites were exterminated by more moderate Taborites. For a long time, the stories about the Adamites, as well as many reports about the Taborites, were thought to be the inventions of their enemies. Such a view was first posited by the French Huguenot Isaac de Beausobre, a representative of the Age of Enlightenment, and in its most extreme form it finds expression in the works of the Czech Marxist historian J. Masaryk. The question of the Adamites has recently been subjected to thorough critical review by the Marxist historians E. Werner and M. Erbstösser. They demonstrate the existence of an earlier Adamite tradition, a cult of Adam, within the Brethren of the Free Spirit. If we take into account certain unavoidable distortions due to the hermetic nature of the teaching, information about the Bohemian Adamites is in full accord with the picture of the European movement of free spirits which we have drawn in the preceding section. For example, Masaryk considers the passage all shall be in common, wives as well, from the Old Chronicle, to be the height of filthy slander. In his opinion, this passage is contradicted by another in Perzabram, who asserts that in Tabor intimacy between husband and wife was prohibited. If husband and wife were seen together or their meeting became known, they were beaten to death. Others were thrown into the river. However, these two passages actually are in full accord with the tradition of the free spirits, who preached unlimited sexual liberty and the sinfulness of marriage at one and the same time. This was also the position of the Homines Intelligentsia group in Brussels at about the same period. We note in this connection that Engels had pointed out, it is a curious fact that in every large revolutionary movement the question of free love comes to the foreground. The Emperor and the Pope appealed for a crusade against the Taborites. But the latter not only crushed the Crusaders but carried war over into neighboring countries. These raids, which received the name the Splendid Campaigns in the Hussite tradition, were undertaken on a yearly basis between 1427 and 1434. Some countries were devastated and looted. In others, for example, Silesia, garrisons were established. A song of the time runs, Meissen and Saxony are destroyed, Silesia and Lauswitz lie in ruins, Bavaria has been turned into a desert, Austria is devastated, Moravia stripped, Bohemia turned upside down. Detachments of Taborites went as far as the Baltic Sea, the walls of Vienna, Leipzig, and Berlin. Nuremberg paid tribute. Czechia was ravaged. In the old collegiate chronicle it is said, in these campaigns the majority of soldiers were foreigners who felt no love for the kingdom. And, fires, robberies, murders, and acts of violence are on their conscience. The whole of Central Europe was subjected to terrible devastation. The Pope was forced to make concessions. At the Basel Council of 1433, an agreement with the Hussites was reached, as a result of which they returned to the Catholic Church. But the more radical, Taborite, faction of Hussites did not recognize the agreement and was annihilated in the battle at Lapani, in 1434. During the wars of 1419–1434, the impact of the Hussites went beyond the devastation of neighboring countries. They also carried their chiliastic and socialist ideas abroad. Their manifestos were read in Barcelona, Paris, Cambridge. In 1423 and 1430, there were disturbances by Hussite adherents in Flanders. In Germany and Austria, Hussite influence was still felt a century later, during the period of the Reformation. Inside Bohemia itself, the defeated Taborites gave rise to the sect of Bohemian Brethren or Unitas Fratrum, who combined the previous intolerant attitude toward the Catholic Church and secular authority with a complete renunciation of violence even for self-defense. We shall have occasion to speak of this sect, which is still in existence, later in this work.